We are holding in Brochos on page Yud Daled Amud Aleph, page 14a. And we spoke about tasting food on a fast day. And the last thing we mentioned was that there are different opinions as to the meaning of this Gemara. It talked about not only tasting food on a fast day, it also talked about saying a bracha on food that you're just tasting. And we had opinions that whether you have to spit out the food, if that's what the Gemara is talking about, that you're just tasting it and spitting it out, or if you're actually swallowing it. And then we mentioned that that's definitely applicable when we talk about the blessing on the food, if it's referring to when you're spitting it out or not. But what about on a fast day? Was it also talking about that you're spitting out the food? What would be the din? Is there any opinions that hold that you would be even allowed to swallow it because your purpose is not to eat it, but rather your purpose is to taste it? And we left off unclear if there were, if there were such opinions. But the truth is there are such opinions that hold that you would be even allowed to taste up to a certain amount, even on a fast day. And even though you're actually eating, which would seem, and of course we're not talking about Yom Kippur, but we're talking, but it would, the idea is that your intent is not for the food, it's in order to taste it, and it would be at least permissible according to those few opinions. The main opinions are that we're talking about that you're actually spitting out the food after you taste it. Okay, so now we're up to the next piece of Gemara, and this is a Gemara about greeting someone. Amar Rav kol hanoisin shalom lachaveiroi koidem sheyispalel. So we are holding about the sixth wide line of the Gemara. It must be halfway down the page, 14a, halfway down the page. I would guess in the art scroll it'd probably be like 14a3. Yeah. And the author of this statement is Rav, Amar Rav. Everyone find the place?
Not yet.
Yes.
Amar Rav, kol hanoisein shalom lachaveroi. Whoever greets his friend.
Okay, found it.
Koidem sheyaspalo, before he davens. So you're greeting your friend before he davens, before you daven. Ki'ilu asa'oi bama. It is as if you made him a bama. You made him an altar. And what this means is that by greeting someone, it is as if you're bringing like a sacrifice on an altar. That is not the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, we're not allowed to bring sacrifices on a bama. A bama is an altar that is outside of the Beis Hamikdash. And if a person greets someone, it's as if he almost like an idol worship, almost like Avodah Zarah, because bringing a sacrifice on a bama, which is a altar, is considered that it's a sin. So the Gemara gives a verse, and what is the verse? The verse is, but Shenemar, as it says, Chidlu lachem min ha'adam asher neshama bi'apoi. Chidlu, which means like remove yourself from the person when you're supposed to be serving Hashem. So chidlu lachem min ha'adam, from person asher neshama ba'apoi, that has the soul in his nostrils. Ki bameh nechshavu, because what is he worth? But if you read it a little differently, al tikri bameh ela bama. Don't read it bameh, read it bama. So if you're involved in honoring a person by greeting him. Before you greet Hashem, it is as if you made him into a bama. And one of the commentaries explains it could have just said kiman nechshavu, and it says bameh. So in other words, the wording is a little extra, and therefore we see it's meant to learn something out of it. And that's why we learn a drasha here, that it's bameh instead of, that it's bama instead of bameh. In other words, of course, it has the simple meaning, but we are adding this other meaning that it means a bama. And of course, we know that it's prohibited to bring sacrifices on a bama. Yes, Ben.
Well, on the first line where it says Kodem Shit Palel, who do they mean? You or the one you are greeting?
You, before you davened.
Before you daven. Okay, thank you.
Now, I did translate this both ways. I translated, there are two explanations here. Does it mean it's as if you're worshiping an idol, or does it mean you're bringing a sacrifice not on the proper mizbeach, the proper altar? And so there are different commentaries how they translate it. Is it as if you brought a sacrifice as an idol, like you're serving idol worship, or does it mean you're bringing a sacrifice when we're not allowed to bring a sacrifice on a bama, which is like during the time the Beis Hamikdash was around, you weren't allowed to bring a sacrifice on a bama on an outside altar. The same thing applied when you were in the when we had the Mishkan. We weren't allowed. When we had Mishkan Shiloi, we weren't allowed. There were times that we were allowed to have bamais, like when the Mishkan was in Noiv and Givain, but most of the time we were not allowed. And after, once the Beis Hamikdash was built, the bamais were prohibited. Bamais again are outside altars that are not part of the Beis Hamikdash. They're outside. They're other external altars, different areas, wherever they were built, wherever anyone built them. And in most of our history, they were prohibited. And they are prohibited now as well. Once the Beis Hamikdash was built, it was prohibited. And so that is the two ways of learning it. Now, the Gemara is mentioning that if you give shalom to your friend, it's as if you did this sacrifice on a bama. Now, what does this mean? Does this mean specifically when you say the word shalom aleichem, because the word shalom is Hashem's name? And is it connected to the word shalom, or is it any type of greeting? And there's a big discussion in the Rabbeinu Yoina over here. And he mentions that one of the main issues that we're dealing with is that you are using you are using the word shalom. So he says, this is specifically when you...
Can I ask you something? So there's
Yes.
more than one word for Hashem?
Well, there's many words that refer to Hashem. I'm just going to explain what he's...
But in the Gemara, there's more than one way to say his name?
Well, we know like Elokim, Elokeinu, the name Adonai, the Yud Ke Vav Ke, which we don't pronounce.
I didn't know that. I did not.
El,
Okay.
yeah, the Talmud in Shavuos mentions 7 names that we're not allowed to erase of Hashem. The 7 names of Hashem that we're not allowed to erase in the tractate Shavuos. It mentions them.
I didn't even know. I did not know.
So Yeah, so there are a number of names. In Kabbalistic writing, it talks about the different meanings of each of the names of Hashem, referring to certain attributes that Hashem expresses. Like, for example, Shem Kel b'chesed. The word Kel, the name Kel of Hashem, is chesed, is kindness. Elokim is normally referred to as Gevura. And then Yud Ke Vav Ke is called the Shem Ha'etzem, the main name of Hashem. So there are different Kabbalistic meanings of each of the names. Anyway, let me read this from the Rabbeinu Yoina. He says that the Chachmei Provenza, which I'm not sure who that is, what city that is, the scholars of Provenza, must be some city
is province. Provence in France.
Provinces, yeah.
In France? Okay.
Provence.
Okay.
Provence in France.
Provence. Thank you, Ezra. So the Chachmei Provenza explain that even when you greet someone, the prohibition is saying the word shalom, because that's the name of Hashem, is shalom. But if you just say good morning, since you're not saying the word shalom, it's not a problem. Now, the Rabbeinu Yoina, he says, but his Rebbe says that even this is only allowed if you're going to see your friend for a different purpose, but just to go there to say hello, you wouldn't be allowed to go there to say hello and say good morning. So what we're talking about here are, we're going to be, as we'll see in the Gemara, there's 3 levels. One is where you go special to greet someone, where you go to, for your own purpose, a different purpose, not to greet them, but while you're going for another purpose, but you're going to be seeing them, and therefore would you be allowed to greet them? And then a third idea is when you happen to meet someone, you happen to bump into someone. So these are the 3 different levels that we'll see now in the Gemara that we are going to deal with. Yes, Ben.
Rabbi,
Yes.
it doesn't deal with you going into synagogue and seeing your friend. Like
No.
before praying, you meet people before Shachrit.
Right. So that
But
would
that
be one of
doesn't
the
include
examples
that.
where you bump
You
in.
can
That
say
would be.
shalom.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
that
would be considered
Okay.
bumping into someone. That would be where you bump
Okay.
into someone, Ben. I don't know if you heard me. Can you hear me,
Okay,
Ben?
I heard
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
Yeah, so that would be considered bumping into someone in shul. Now,
Can I ask another question?
yes,
Before you go to shul, don't you daven first early in the morning?
well, the main purpose we're supposed to go to shul for is to daven. But before you go to shul, you say some of the morning blessings at home. So
But that's not enough to.
that's not considered the davening. You're really not davened yet. You haven't davened yet. You have said some morning blessings. You said the moda'ani. You said the morning blessings, but you did not pray yet.
Yeah,
So
it's
that's
not a-
why later on you go to shul and you'll daven. Then you can greet as many people as you want afterwards. But
Okay.
before that, it's problematic to greet someone.
But isn't it also important that, again, to have a quote unquote formal davening, you have to have 10 men or 10 individuals that would constitute
In opinion.
formation of a prayer.
Oy vey, Smear.
Right.
Two different levels.
The best way to daven is with a minyan, but
Right.
you can still daven without a minyan. But
Right,
yeah,
right.
but of course it's much better to daven with a minyan, and that would be a reason to go to shul for the minyan. Although we did learn in some of the Gemaras earlier, we mentioned how it's powerful to daven in shul even if there's no minyan there. There's a special benefit of davening in a shul even without a minyan.
There's a special hechsher. There you go.
So the question on our Gemara is a question from the Mishnah that we learned about interruptions. And that should be a question that should be on everyone's mind. We learned about interrupting to greet people in the middle of Shema and in the middle of the blessings of the Shema, right? We spoke about greeting people.
Yeah.
And here we're saying how terrible it is to greet someone before you daven.
Yeah.
So does anyone see any contradiction there? Again, we learned in the Mishnah about greeting people in the middle of the Shema or in the middle of the blessings of the Shema. And we said there are different scenarios where a person could reply to a greeting, to greet someone initially, in between paragraphs, in the middle of a paragraph. And here the Gemara seems to be saying very clearly that you cannot greeting someone is a terrible thing before davening. Yes, Yehuda. We can't hear you because you're muted.
The examples we gave previously were specific situations where it's someone that you fear, where it's someone you respect. So
you don't see it as a major contradiction, because we could explain that here where we're talking about how terrible of a sin it is where it's not someone who you have to fear or respect. But because those are valid exceptions to the rule. This is talking about the general rule, and those we're talking about specific cases where it should be permissible. That's your explanation. Is that right? Okay, that's a good point. That's a good point.
I think
Yes,
Susan.
Yeah.
I think what they're talking about is people who are not Jewish, who don't practice Judaism. Maybe that's what they're really talking about here.
Okay.
That if you bump into somebody that is not of your religious background, if you haven't, I think maybe that's what this is talking about. Not the other.
I would disagree with you, because we're talking about going initially to greet them. And I think your example would fit better if we were talking about replying to a greeting. That's where I think your example would fit better, because that's where it would be applicable to deal with someone greeting you, and what are you going to do if you don't reply? But to go initially to greet a non-Jew.
Okay, but it says here that you should first pray and acknowledge the righteousness of the Creator, and only then should you set out on your way. In other words, it's saying very specifically, you have to complete the prayers before you leave your whatever and bump into somebody.
Right. Okay, fine, very good. Ben?
I wanted to say, I say it last time too, that Shema, we do a declaration of Shema, and then God is talking to us and telling us what we need to do. In praying, we are always praying to God. So it's a little different situation.
Well, the problem is that when you're in the middle of the blessings of the Shema, or in the Shema itself, you still haven't done the main part of the prayer, which is the Shemona Esrei. So you're still before you prayed. So you're dealing with the interruption, but what I'm dealing with is the fact that, and what the Gemara is dealing with is the fact that this is before you fulfilled your obligation of prayer. So in other words, you have an interesting point that I remember you mentioned earlier about this, the interruption aspect. But here we're dealing with an issue of giving someone honor before you've given Hashem the full honor of your full prayer. So I think that's what we're going to be, I think that's a difference. Yes, Robert.
I think one of the facts for me, issues for me is when Susan talks, was it Susan, right? Talked about, again, dealing with non-Jews. But, within all of this process, unless we delineate that we're in a non-Jewish environment, we're really talking about from Jew to Jew. And that's the milieu that we're working in. And that, that's where the tenets, the practice should be. But
Okay,
when I go to synagogue, when I go for shacharit, and while I'm putting on my tefillin, we haven't convened yet as a praying community. And always, there's not a lot of talk, but there's a lot of head nodding and recognition of others as we put on our tefillin. And then finally, when the Baal Torah starts, then we all start the prayers together. And that's, again, sort of an introduction, preface to beginning the prayer process as an organized minyan or Jewish community.
see, I'm very ignorant about all that. I wasn't raised Orthodox, so I'm not,
Hey, no one's being critical. It's just,
I
we're
no,
all
I
sorting
know.
it out ourselves.
That's why my ask a rabbi questions, I feel like I'm very stupid. It's just that I wasn't.
No. I
Very,
think we should have a
Susan, you asked
couple of
very
minutes
good
of
questions.
ask the
Don't worry.
rabbi questions, right, before we begin.
thank
Don't
you.
worry about it. Okay, Edith.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think of it as you're coming with the intention, at least, to pray and honor God, and by greeting somebody else, you're being distracted. So it's like, don't be distracted. Set out on what you have to do and do that, and then do whatever else you need to do.
So,
Or am I wrong?
No,
Well,
you're not.
you're not wrong. I mean, I don't know if I would use the word distracted. I think I would use the word more disrespectful, because you're disrespecting the,
Okay.
Yes. Honoring Hashem first.
Right.
That Hashem deserves your honor first. So you're being distracted, but your distraction is a disrespectful distraction, because you should prioritize Hashem first.
Yeah,
Right.
Yes,
What I meant
Yehuda.
is that you're prioritizing.
yeah,
Yeah, you're prioritizing the other person instead of Hashem.
right.
Okay, Yehuda.
Right. Correct.
I brought this up before.
Yeah.
The example of Abraham when Hashem was talking to him, and he saw he didn't know they were angels at that time, but he thought they were just visitors, and he told God, wait a minute, and attended to the visitors.
Right.
That wasn't prayer.
And that was definitely a very interesting
Inappropriate.
story, and very surprising that he did that. We never would have dreamed of doing such a thing, except for the fact that we have a precedent by Avraham.
Right.
Who would have ever dreamed of telling Hashem, wait a minute, I gotta attend to some lowlifes who came to my door, worship there.
We have to schmooze.
It's quite a story, and it's quite a message. Quite a message.
Rabbi.
Yeah, we'll have to think about it soon after we finish the Gemara. Maybe we'll try to touch on it. Yes, Howard.
From what I remember, the previous Gemara, we were talking about interruptions either within sentences of Shema or between the paragraphs of Shema. This Gemara seems to be talking about greetings before we start davening. So maybe there's no contradiction.
Good point.
So that's a very good point. You definitely have recited some prayers and shown some acknowledgement to Hashem already. By the time you've reached the Brochos of Shema, you've already given honor and praise to Hashem. It's a very good point. What the understanding of the Gemara, which we'll see, and the truth is I didn't really go through the Gemara with you yet. So I'm sort of discussing it outside before we actually read through it. but what we are going to understand is that the Gemara emphasizes that the main part of the davening is the Shmona Esrei. It doesn't say it clearly, but that's obviously the understanding of the Gemara, that the main part of the davening is the Shmona Esrei. Why that is, and why isn't it good enough? The fact that you've shown some honor to Hashem. One thought that comes to mind is that we're dealing with a verse here that says that your neshama is still in your nostrils. And I once heard a vart, and I have to look it up where I saw this. I'm going back, years, that somehow when you daven, your neshama spreads out to your whole body. And so the verse here is saying that before you do Shemona Esrei, which is the main part of the davening, your neshama is still in your nostrils. And so if you just fit it into the verse, you need to do the Shemona Esrei in order to be able to not be called a bama, to be called bringing a sacrifice on a bama. You would need to do the Shemona Esrei. It could also be that you've praised Hashem, true, but the fact is that part of honoring Hashem is showing that Hashem is the source and the support for all of our needs. And so that acknowledgement is a major part of the respect that we have to show Hashem, that we have to ask our needs from Hashem. And therefore, even though you've done some praises, but you didn't do the request yet from Hashem, which is considered a major part of the respect. And therefore, by going and greeting someone, you are desecrating, or you're disrespectful to Hashem's honor, because you're not asking him for his needs. Possibly you could add a little to that with the fact that you're greeting someone else shows that you sort of are hoping to get something from your friend before you're trying to get something from Hashem. Because why are you greeting him? There's some benefit that you're hoping ultimately to get, even if you don't even have it in mind what it is, and you don't even know that you're going to need it today, but maybe one day you'll need some. Why are you greeting him now? Because ultimately you want that friendship. So it's ultimately for the needs, but what about Hashem? And Hashem, you should be asking for your needs first. Maybe just trying to throw a little thought together, but the idea is that the Shemona Esrei is the main part of the prayer. But I think it's a good question what you're asking, Howard, that it would seem that you did honor Hashem somewhat. You said Baruch Sha'amar, you said Ashrei, you said some other verses. You spoke about Kriyas Yamsuf and the Oz Yashir. You did a lot. You said the Brochos of Shema. You said the Shema. So it seems like you did a lot of respect for Hashem, but somehow the Shemona Esrei is a major factor over here, and it does deserve more thought. I was just throwing some thoughts there, but I think we need to. I'm not satisfied with what I shared. We'll have to look into this more. Yes, Yehuda.
Well, I think the only part of the davening that is deraisa is the Shema. The Shemona Esrei is rabbinic, and in the Shema you're allowed to interrupt. In the Shemona Esrei you can't.
Very good point.
So that's a very good question. Yehuda's asking a very strong question.
Oh my goodness.
And Yehuda's asking that it is a little surprising that Shema you can interrupt even though it's biblical, and Shemona Esrei you can't. So I mentioned once that there is a Yerushalmi that says that you see it in the words that you're allowed to interrupt. It says v'dibarta bam, you could speak in the middle of them. So the Yerushalmi mentions that here you would be allowed to speak. It's mentioned in the Shema itself. It's sort of like part of the laws, part of the rules in the Torah, is that you would be allowed to speak in the Shema. Now, the explanation, to answer your question with more explanation, I would say that the Shmona Esrei, you are considered like an Eved Kamei More. You are like an Eved in front of your master, like a servant in front of your master. And when you're saying the Shema, you're accepting the yoke of heaven. So they're two separate situations that you're in. When you're a servant in front of your master, you have to be much more careful than when you are just accepting the yoke of heaven. So in other words, even though Shema is biblical, but what are you doing when you're saying the Shema? You're accepting the yoke of heaven. The Shemona Esrei is only rabbinic, but what are you doing there? You are considered like a servant in front of your master. There, you got to be much more careful to honor Hashem as a servant. So that, in other words, even though you're mentioning one is biblical, one is rabbinic, but they have different. You're in a different scenario in each of them. Yes, Yehuda.
Yeah, I don't get that, because if you're accepting the yoke of heaven with the Shema, that to me seems more
like a servant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting question, but it's not really so. In other words, you are accepting Hashem's commandments on you. Now, are you in the mode of by you accepting it? It's sort of like you are a person who's now accepting it. You are yourself, and you are accepting to follow his commandments.
Yeah.
So, in a certain sense, you are you. Later on, when you do the Shemona Esrei, you are in the mode of servitude to Hashem, of being an Eved. So you are it's
Big difference.
I think accepting the yoke has a bigger element of yourself being an entity than when you are in the servant mode. I think that's the explanation. Again, it's not my own explanation. This is not my own thought. It's mentioned in the Svarim that you're considered an Eved here, and here you're considered accepting the yoke.
But the thing was, when God freed us from slavery in Egypt, he said, you're going to be my slave.
So we are always an Eved to
servants.
Hashem.
Right.
We're always really an Eved to Hashem. But the thing is, Hashem doesn't expect us to act in a way as if we are in front of him. In other words, we're sent on our missions throughout the day. So while we're on our missions, we're meant to talk to people. You know what I mean? We're meant to do our job. So so the mode, we're always in a sense like a servant, but what type of a servant? When we're in front of the king, being a servant who's now praying to the king, that's the Shemona Esrei mode. When we are accepting the yoke of heaven and saying the Shema, we're not in that same mode. We're in the mode of we're doing our part of our other mission, but we're not considered in front of the king, being the serving the king with our prayer. That's not the mode that we're in. We're in the mode of accepting the yoke of heaven, which is part of our mission, our daily mission, which means that there could be scenarios where you could interrupt, where you got to do your daily mission. In front of the king, when you're doing that prayer in front of the king, there you're not allowed to, there's no such thing as interrupting, no matter what's going on. It doesn't matter what type of a message you receive, a text message, you do not even look at that text message. So that's that would seem like the point here. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say it might also be a matter of kavana. When you're getting ready to pray, you have a train of thought. And if you're greeting somebody, it's kind of breaking your train of thought. You're concentrating now on your friend instead of the mission in front of you, which was to go and pray.
Right, right.
So you're losing a little of the kavana that you should have when you're going to pray.
Right, right. So that would be a question in the Shema part, not in the Our Gemara. Our Gemara is talking about that you're before davening and you're greeting someone, and that's what we're dealing with, greeting someone before the davening. And here you don't have that issue.
Yeah,
but in the middle of this,
when you're getting ready to daven in the morning, you have a certain train of thought, you know.
well,
And that
it
would
doesn't.
break your train of thought that you are getting ready to pray.
It doesn't really say that you're preparing to pray there. It just mentions that you haven't yet prayed and you're greeting someone. So it's not necessarily
Okay.
breaking your train of thought. Now, I must compliment you that most people do not necessarily do that, have their preparation before davening with the great, with their train of thought. So that's very impressive
I
that
do.
you do that when you prepare a lot before davening. It's very special and it's definitely appropriate. But most of the people I know, they pop into shul and they've been thinking about they're just waking up and they're lucky to be able, when they get into shul, they start dealing with the davening.
Can I ask
anyway, so that's very nice that you mentioned that, and it's definitely appropriate to prepare. In fact, Hasidim would always prepare and study Hasidus before davening, and they still, even nowadays, of course, that they try to prepare and make preparations for the davening and thinking about Hashem and getting in the mode of the davening, which is definitely a special way to enter davening. Yes, Susan.
I just want to ask you, the Shemona Esrei, the last words, is it about so that your days and the days of your children may be prolonged?
That's the Shema. That's the Shema, and that's the second paragraph.
Okay, so
That's the second paragraph of the
is the
Shema.
Shemona Esrei.
That's not the Shemona Esrei. No, Shemona Esrei is a few pages later. It's 18 blessings. No, actually, it's 19 blessings. Literally, the Shemona Esrei means 18, but they added an extra blessing, so it turns into 19 blessings, and it's a few pages right after that.
Okay.
Called the Amidah. It's also
called the Amidah.
Another term for it is Amidah.
Okay, now
Okay.
I found it. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I want to go further in the Gemara, so we're gonna put a hold on some of the questions. I just mentioned Stuart. Welcome. I'd like to welcome Stuart. And I just mentioned that I don't know if you have a Gemara, so if you want, you could try to pick up, search on Sefaria.org for the Talmud Brochos, page 14a. We're in the middle of the page. Talmud Brochos 14a, if you want to follow inside. Okay, so Amar Rav, Kol HaNosin Shalom. I'm going to start from the two dots again. We're in the middle of the page. Amar Rav, Kol HaNosin Shalom L'chaveiro Kodim Sheyispalel. If a person gives shalom to his friend, greets his friend and says hello and shalom aleichem before he davens, ki'ilu asoi bama, as if he made a bama, or he made him a bama, made him this altar, which is either considered like he worshipped idols or considered like he sacrificed on a altar, not in the Beis Hamikdash. Shenemar, in the verse for this, as it says in the verse in Isaiah, chidlu lachem min ha'adam asher neshama bi'apoi, remove yourself from the person that has a neshama in his nostrils. Ki bameh nechshavhu, because what is he worth? And as I mentioned, it should have said ki ma nechshavhu, and it says bameh. So the Gemara has a reason to now make a little drasha, change to give a little explanation. Why does it say the word bameh? Because it's hinting to a bama. Al tikri bameh el bama, that you should go away from other people, remove yourself from greeting other people, that because you still have your neshama in your nostril, and you shouldn't be greeting people, because by greeting people, you are considered like either building a bama or sacrificing on a bama, or worshiping idols like a bama. So that is the verse, the message from the verse. So Shmuel Amar, Shmuel says, Bameh chashavtoi lozeh v'lo le'eloka, that it's not the word, it's not bama, but it's bameh. Bameh means, how could you do this? And how could you consider this person and give him respect and not Hashem, your God? And Mesiv Rav Sheshas, now Rav Sheshas now asks the question that I mentioned earlier. What did we learn in the Mishnah? He asks a contradiction from the Mishnah, because the Mishnah says, Biprakim, in the middle of, in between chapters, in between chapters, Shayel Mebnei HaKavod,
Shortcuts.
you could greet someone who you have to honor. Umeshiv, and you can reply. And that was Reb Meir. And then Reb Yehuda said that you could greet someone who you have to honor, and you could reply to anyone. And so we see that you are allowed to greet someone that you need to honor. So you're asking, why are you honoring this person before Hashem? In the Mishnah, we learned that you are allowed to honor people before you honor Hashem. So
Doesn't make sense.
the fact that Rav says that you can never do this, at least from his statement, and he didn't say, well, someone you have to honor, that you're obligated to honor, or you should honor. So it seems like he's giving more of a blanket rule that you're never allowed to greet someone. And, or like all people are included in this rule, I should say. That's what it sounds like from his statement. And the Mishnah emphasized that there are people that you should honor and give them and greet them. Someone that you're supposed to honor, you should greet even before the Shemona Esrei. Now, if you look in Rashi, Rashi says that Kriya Shema is before Tefillah. Kriya Shema is before the Shemona Esrei. So Rashi brings out this point very clearly that we're dealing with Shemona Esrei here. Of course, you have to say that, because otherwise, what's the Gemara's question? And the Gemara says that how could you be greeting someone B'nei HaKavod if for honor, and you still did not do the Shemona Esrei? In our Gemara, Rav and Shmuel both said that you're not allowed to greet someone. And the main point of their statement was that you're greeting someone and honoring someone before you're honoring Hashem. And so the Gemara answers that Tirgama Reb Abba b'mashkim l'pischoi. So Rabbi Abba explained that what is Rav and Shmuel talking about, that you're prohibited from greeting someone, that's when you go to his house. But if you bump into the person on the way, then it would not be a problem. So therefore, the case in the Mishnah where you have to greet someone that you're supposed to honor, that person that you have to honor, and the Mishnah said you could greet them, that is a case where you are happen to bump into them. In other words, a person popped into shul. They came into your shul, and you feel obligated to say hello to them because they will be, it'll be an insult if you don't greet them. They're someone you're supposed to honor, and therefore you are allowed to honor them and greet them because you didn't go special. But when you go special to honor someone and greet someone, that's a problem because that's disrespectful to Hashem. You go and honor another person
And it's all intent.
and you're not honoring Hashem on purpose. You're purposely going to someone's house and greeting them. Now, Tosfos on the bottom says this is the halacha. If you bump into someone, it would be permissible if it just happens. You happen to bump into them, but to go to their door and greet them, that would be a problem. Now, the Shulchan Aruch in chapter 89, it talks about the laws of greeting someone. And it says in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, he brings down that once the time of davening comes, alois hashachar, you're not allowed to go to someone's house and say shalom aleichem. And it's hinted to in this verse. How can you consider this person honoring him before you honor me?
Right. Right.
And the main honor of Hashem is Shmona Esrei. So it's interesting that in Shulchan Aruch it says the main honor of Hashem is Shmona Esrei, and serving Hashem is Tfilas Yudches. So this is considered like a major Iker Kavoidai of Makoim and Avaydasai he Tfilas Yudches. So I wonder if that's connected to what I was explaining earlier, that asking Hashem for his needs, for your needs, that's considered the greatest honor. In other words, giving praises is not as great as asking Hashem for your needs. That's just a thought. I'm trying to understand what the words of the Shulchan Aruch mean. I think maybe that's the explanation. That this is the Iker Kavoidai, the main honor. So, and the main service of Hashem, the Iker Avaydasai, Iker Kavoidai of Hashem, and the Avaydasai is Tfilas Yudches.
I can't, wait, I have to interrupt. I'm sorry. How can asking God for your needs be more important than honoring, than
praising?
I can't fathom that.
Well,
that's putting yourself first.
Well, it's acknowledging that everything that you can dream of is all from Hashem.
But we already know that. That's a given.
And what about all your praises are also all givens? Everything is a given, but it's all about expressing it. And the expression of your praises may be less valuable than the expression of your acknowledgement that you need, and you're willing to subjugate yourself and humble yourself before Hashem. Okay. But I will add one point, and that is that the fact that you are a servant before Hashem, maybe that might be the main point here. That your avodah is tfilas yudches. That's really what it means to honor Hashem, is when you act like a servant before Hashem. So that might also play a role. That might be a point here.
The minute I open my eyes, when I wake up, I say thank you to God for another day.
Right. But here you're actually not just thanking Hashem, you're saying, you know what, Hashem, I am your servant.
Okay.
So this might be an additional point as well. So again, I mentioned two things. One thing was that you're acknowledging that everything that you can dream of, it's all going to come from Hashem, no matter how many degrees you have from universities and all your talent. It's all, everything that you want is going to come from Hashem. And the second thing is that you are Hashem's servant, and that is as well a way of honoring Hashem. Now, therefore, it says, even if you got up and said all the morning blessings and praises, and you accepted the yoke of heaven in Shema, and it's time before the davening, it is still prohibited to go to your friend's house and give him shalom aleichem or even say good morning. If you don't go, if that's what your purpose is. But if your purpose is to go to see, do other business, and you're happen to, so you're going to his house, not for the purpose of greeting him, but to do, let's say, to do something there, and so you have to go to his entrance, and you would be allowed to say good morning, but don't say shalom aleichem, because the name of Hashem is shalom, and this is not honorable to give kavod with Hashem's name to another person before you gave kavod to Hashem with the avodas hatfilah, with the service of prayer. And it would also be prohibited to bow down, even without saying shalom, because that's also very great honor, just like the honor that we honor Hashem when we bow down in the Shemona, that we bow down to Hashem, and it would be prohibited to do that to a person. And this all applies when you go to someone's entrance. But if you bumped into him in the marketplace or in the shul, according to law, according to the letter of the law, you would be allowed to say shalom aleichem, and you would be allowed to bow down to him because you bumped into him. You didn't go special. But the custom is not to say shalom aleichem before davening, even if you bumped into him, even if you're not bowing down, and even if you normally say shalom aleichem to him. But rather, you should just say good morning, because since you're changing the term, it'll cause you to keep in mind that you're not allowed to be involved in anything else until you daven, like will be explained. And some prohibit this. Let me just finish one last paragraph here. Some prohibit bowing down, and even if you bumped into him, even without saying shalom aleichem, and you should be careful to follow this extra stringency. However, if you already said the morning blessings, you could be lenient, since this prohibition is not mentioned in the Talmud, and it's only logic. But if you go to his entrance, then it would be prohibited to bow down, even without saying shalom aleichem, until you daven the Shemona Esrei. So that is the law in its spelled out version, which is very nice, because Howard's question is actually asked in the wording of the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. He sort of asks your question. He says, even though you woke up, you said the morning blessings, and you said many praises, even though you did that, and you accepted the yoke of heaven in Shema, and it's time. But the main honor of Hashem is in the service is Tfilas Shemona Esrei.
Wow.
So, but according to what we read, it sounds like maybe we could add a third point to what I explained, that maybe the main honor is the bowing. So it sounds like we've got 3 points here to the fact that Shemona Esrei is more of an honor to Hashem. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say, if I read the pasuk, chidlu lachem min ha'adam asher neshama be'apo, ki b'meh nechshav hu, don't overestimate or don't overappraise a man, because the neshama in him was blown into his nostrils by God. What makes him so important? B'meh nechshav hu. You know, his whole life came from God. So how do you make him so important? Overappraise him.
Right. Okay, good. I like that. Very, 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 very well explained. You know, it's interesting when you learn a lot of the Gemaras. A lot of times you sort of like, you sort of like just flow through. You just like pass over the verses.
Follow the line.
Not always easy to explain the verse so well. Most people don't know Isaiah so well, or Talmud explains verses from this from Ezekiel and Isaiah and Job, So a lot of times we just like, sort of like translate it surface, very surface. But thank you for, that's good. That's a great, that's well explained. Yes, Ezra.
Well, this is the reason why I pulled out a Yeshaya and started looking into it in order to see what the context of the line was.
Yeah.
And basically, it talks about the fact that I guess man at that time was very much steeped in idol worship, and they were looking at other things as well to worship. And Isaiah comes along at this point, basically says, all those things are nothing, and the person who worships them, who worships them, is really doing himself a disservice, because it was God who, in fact, instilled into him life. And then this pasuk comes. And that's the context of the pasuk, basically saying, remove yourself from those kind of people, because, today, this is what Rashi says, today they have a neshama in their nostrils, and tomorrow it's gone. So who is he that you should, honor him? You need to honor God before you honor them. And that's the context of this pasuk. Now, the people who made these statements, they knew all this stuff. It was at their fingertips, and they knew exactly what the context was of the statement. When it's put here in the Gemara, it's very difficult for us to really understand unless we go back and we see in what context this was in. So
thank you so much, Ezra. That's great.
When the man is basically saying, or when who was it? Rav basically says this. He's telling us, in the context of what this is all about. This is what this statement is saying, and this is the reason why it's important to say to Hashem first, and pray to him and thank him for everything before you go to somebody else and say, give him shalom.
Okay, thank you so much for doing that. I will just mention that it is only a hint. It's not like at least according to the Shulchan Aruch that I read, it's not like a biblical law. It's a remes. So that's why it's sort of, but it is definitely it's definitely appropriate to look up a pasuk. And thank you, Ben, also for bringing out a little of the context, and Ezra for giving us the whole picture. We have 1 minute left.
Without reading Yeshaya.
You know what? You broke up. I did not hear what you said. What did you say, Ben?
I said I didn't read Yeshayahu. I just thought about it as I'm reading the pasuk.
Yes. Yes, some people can figure it out from the actual verse, and otherwise we normally have to look at the whole context. So thank you both of you for developing that. I'm just going to read one more piece of the Gemara, and the Gemara says, Amar Rav Idi bar Avin, Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Ashian, Asur loy la'adam lasis chafetzav koydem sheyispal. It's prohibited for a person to do his chafetzav, his needs, his business, his interests before he davens. Shenemar, as it says, tzedek lefanav yahalech v'yosem lederech pa'amav. As it says, tzedek before you, yahalech should go, and tzedek, which means you're davening, where you make Hashem righteous, meaning you acknowledge Hashem's righteousness, and afterwards, so tzedek should go before you, which is your davening. The yosem lederech pa'amav means your steps. You will place on the road your steps, which means that you can start doing your things after you first are matzdik HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You first show righteousness, give righteousness to Hashem. So that's the prohibition of a person doing their business before davening. Okay, everyone have a wonderful day, and we'll see you either later today or tomorrow. Sei gesund.
Like, thank you, Rabbi.